It was just another mundane Tuesday night at the 7-Eleven where I worked in suburban Boston. The clock crawled towards midnight as I restocked the energy drinks, my mind wandering to the upcoming weekend plans with my college buddies. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the empty aisles. Outside, the occasional car whooshed by on the rain-slicked street, their headlights briefly illuminating the store's windows. I'd been pulling these graveyard shifts for months to help pay for my engineering degree at MIT, and the routine had become second nature. Little did I know that this night would be anything but routine. As I straightened up behind the counter, my phone buzzed with a text from my roommate asking if I'd be up for a late-night study session when I got home. I replied with a quick sure, not realizing it might be the last normal conversation I'd have for a while. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up, expecting to see the usual crowd of night owls or partygoers grabbing snacks. Instead, what walked in would set in motion a chain of events that would haunt me for years to come. A man in a dark hoodie entered, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. Something about his demeanor set me on edge immediately. He moved with an eerie stillness, his steps deliberate and silent on the linoleum floor. I cleared my throat and offered a hesitant, "Good evening, sir. Can I help you find anything?" The man didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge me. He just stood there, facing the chip aisle, but not moving. My palms began to sweat as I watched him, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. After what felt like an eternity, he slowly turned his head towards me. I couldn't make out his features, but I felt his gaze boring into me. "You're alone here, aren't you?" he asked, his voice a raspy whisper that sent chills down my spine. Before I could respond, he abruptly turned and walked out, leaving me shaken. I rushed to the door, locking it behind him, my heart pounding. As I peered out into the parking lot, I saw no sign of him. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. Trying to shake off the encounter, I told myself I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The night was far from over, and that man's presence had only been the beginning. With shaky hands, I unlocked the door, telling myself I was being ridiculous. I had a job to do after all. Trying to focus on something normal, I decided to restock the cigarette display behind the counter. As I headed to the stockroom, the fluorescent lights flickered ominously. The stockroom door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet store. I flicked on the light switch, but the bulb sputtered and died, leaving me in darkness. Cursing under my breath, I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight. As the beam cut through the gloom, I heard a soft thud from the far corner of the room. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. No response. Just as I was about to convince myself it was nothing, I heard it again. A distinct shuffling sound, like something dragging across the floor. My heart raced as I swept the light around, half expecting to see the hooded man lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing there, just boxes and shelves. As I backed out of the stockroom, I heard a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl. I slammed the door shut, my mind reeling. What the hell was going on? I leaned against the stockroom door, trying to calm my racing heart, when suddenly, the lights throughout the store flickered and went out. The hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of the fluorescent lights cut off abruptly, plunging the store into an eerie silence. My phone's flashlight seemed pathetically inadequate in the vast darkness. I fumbled my way to the front, hoping to see streetlights or passing cars, but the world outside was pitch black. It wasn't just the store. The whole neighborhood seemed to be without power. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, shadows seemed to move and shift in the corners of my vision. I tried to reason with myself. It was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap on the store's front window. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned towards the sound. In the faint moonlight breaking through the clouds, I saw a hand pressed against the glass. 5 fingers splayed out, then slowly curled into a fist. I stumbled backwards, knocking over a display of chips. The crash seemed deafening in the silence. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the hand was gone. The sudden shrill ring of the store phone cut through the silence like a knife, making me jump. With trembling hands, I reached for the receiver, my mind racing. Who could be calling the store in the middle of a blackout? Hello? I stammered. At first, there was nothing but static on the line. Then, a voice, distorted and barely audible, came through. "He's coming for you," it whispered. My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "What do you mean?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. The voice continued, ignoring my questions. "He's already inside. You need to hide." The line went dead. I stood there, frozen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. My mind was reeling. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was the voice trying to warn me? I slowly put down the receiver, my eyes darting around the darkened store. If someone was really in here with me, where could they be hiding? And more importantly, where could I hide? The store suddenly felt like a trap, with danger lurking in every shadow. I needed to find a way out, and fast. Gathering what little courage I had left, I crept towards the front of the store, staying low and using the aisles for cover. As I neared the windows, I peered out into the parking lot, searching for any sign of movement. At first, all I could see was the empty lot, shrouded in darkness. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and my heart nearly stopped. There, standing motionless in the middle of the lot, was a figure. The brief flash wasn't enough to make out any details, but I could tell it was facing the store, facing me. Thunder rumbled overhead as I ducked down, my mind racing. Was it the hooded man from earlier? The owner of the hand on the window? As another flash lit up the sky, I chanced another look. The figure was closer now, having moved several feet towards the store without making a sound. I scrambled back from the window, my breath coming in short gasps. I needed to call for help, but my cell phone had no signal, and the store phone was dead. I was trapped, alone in the dark, with an unknown threat lurking just outside. And worst of all, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of some twisted plan. With shaking hands, I double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows. The main entrance was secure, the emergency exit bolted shut. But as I rattled the handle of the back door leading to the alley, my heart sank. It wouldn't budge. Not because it was locked, but because something seemed to be blocking it from the outside. Panic began to set in as I realized I was truly trapped. The store, once a familiar space, now felt like a cage. Every shadow held a potential threat, every sound a possible danger. I tried to control my breathing, to think rationally. There had to be a way out of this. Maybe I could break a window? But the noise might attract unwanted attention. And what if the figure outside was waiting for just that? As I debated my options, a new sound froze me in place. From somewhere in the store came a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged across the floor. It was coming from the direction of the stockroom. My earlier fear came flooding back. There really was something in there. And now, with the power out and all exits blocked, I was locked in with it. Desperation fueled my actions as I frantically searched for anything that could help me. The store's landline was still dead, and my cell phone remained frustratingly without signal. I considered trying to use the store's computer to send an email or message for help, but without power, it was useless. In a moment of inspiration, I remembered the old CB radio we kept for emergencies. It was battery operated and might just be my ticket out of this nightmare. I crept towards the manager's office, every step feeling like it might be my last. The scraping sound from the stockroom had stopped, but the silence was almost worse. I could feel eyes on me, watching from the shadows. Finally reaching the office, I fumbled in the dark for the radio. My fingers closed around it, and for a moment, hope surged through me. I turned it on, adjusting the frequency with trembling hands. "Hello? Is anyone out there? I need help," I whispered urgently into the receiver. Static crackled back at me. Then, through the white noise, I heard a voice. My heart leapt until I recognized the raspy whisper from earlier. "No one can help you now." In a desperate bid to understand what was happening, I turned to the store's security system. The backup battery was still operational, and I prayed the footage might provide some answers. As the screen flickered to life, I rewound to the beginning of my shift. Everything seemed normal until the hooded man entered. I leaned in closer, hoping to catch a glimpse of his face. What I saw made my blood run cold. Where his face should have been was just emptiness, a void. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things, but as I continued watching, it got worse. The man didn't leave when I thought he had. Instead, the footage showed him slipping into the stockroom while I was distracted. My hands shook as I fast-forwarded, watching myself move around the store, oblivious to the intruder. In every frame, I could see a shadow, a flicker of movement, just out of my sight. He had been there the whole time, watching, waiting. And now, as I stared at the current feed, I saw a dark figure standing directly behind me. I spun around. A scream caught in my throat, but there was nothing there. When I turned back to the monitor, the figure was gone, but a message was scratched into the screen. "Let's play a game." The message on the screen galvanized me into action. Game or not, I needed to get out of here now. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from behind the counter, determined to break a window and escape. As I approached the front of the store, a flicker of movement caught my eye. The shadowy figure was outside again, closer than ever. I hesitated, weighing my options. The back door was still blocked, but maybe I could use the extinguisher to force it open. I crept towards the rear of the store, every nerve on high alert. The stockroom door stood slightly ajar, and I could hear faint shuffling sounds from within. My heart pounding, I edged past it towards the exit. Just as I reached for the door handle, a hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, swinging the extinguisher wildly. It connected with something solid, and I heard a grunt of pain. Not waiting to see what Edie hit, I shouldered the door with all my might. It gave way slightly, enough for me to see it had been barricaded with dumpsters. As I struggled to squeeze through the gap, I felt hands grasping at my legs, pulling me back into the store. I kicked frantically, breaking free from the grasp and tumbling into the alley. Rain was pouring now, soaking me instantly. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run, but stopped short. The alley was a dead end, blocked by a high fence. I was trapped. A low chuckle behind me sent chills down my spine. I whirled around to see the hooded figure emerging from the store. "Ready or not," he rasped, "here I come." In a panic, I ducked behind the dumpsters, trying to control my ragged breathing. I could hear him moving, searching. Come out, wherever you are," he called, his voice a twisted parody of a children's game. I closed my eyes, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. But when I opened them, he was there, looming over me. I lashed out, catching him off guard, and bolted past him back into the store. I raced through the aisles, knocking over displays to slow him down. I needed a place to hide, to think. The bathroom. I could lock myself in. As I reached for the door handle, I hesitated. What if I was trapping myself? But I could hear him coming. Out of options, I dove inside, slamming the door behind me. As I huddled in the bathroom, trying to quiet my panicked breathing, I heard a soft tap on the door. My heart nearly stopped. "Go away!" I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. "Please," came a whispered response. "Let me in. He's after me too." The voice sounded young, frightened, nothing like the raspy tones of my pursuer. Could there be another victim, or was this a trick? "How do I know I can trust you?" I asked, inching closer to the door. "Please," the voice begged. "I'm scared. I just want to go home." Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open. A young woman, probably no older than me, slipped inside. Her eyes were wide with terror, her clothes disheveled. "Thank you," she breathed. "I thought I was going to die out there." As she moved past me, I caught a whiff of a familiar scent, the same cologne the hooded man had worn. Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain in my side. Looking down, I saw a small knife in her hand, now stained red. "You should have stayed hidden," she said, her frightened demeanor melting away into a cold smile. Now, the real game begins. Pain exploded through my body as I stumbled backward, clutching my side. The woman, if she even was a woman, advanced on me, the knife glinting in the dim light. In a desperate move, I lunged forward, tackling her to the ground. The knife clattered across the tile floor as we grappled. I managed to knee her in the stomach and scramble away, bursting out of the bathroom. Blood seeped through my fingers as I pressed them against the wound. I knew I needed help fast, or I wouldn't make it through the night. As I staggered through the store, I could hear her behind me, her laughter mixing with the sound of the hooded man's heavy footsteps. They were toying with me now, like cats playing with a wounded mouse. My vision started to blur. Whether from blood loss or fear, I couldn't tell. I made it to the front of the store, leaning heavily against the counter. Through the windows, I could see flashing lights in the distance. Police? Ambulance? Hope surged through me. If I could just hold on a little longer, maybe I'd survive this nightmare. But as the lights drew closer, my pursuers closed in. "Time's up," the hooded man growled. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. As I waited for the killing blow, a crash of breaking glass shattered the tense silence. Red and blue lights flooded the store as police officers poured in, guns drawn. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them!" they shouted. I slumped to the floor in relief, pointing weakly towards my attackers. But when I looked up, they were gone. The officers helped me up, calling for medical assistance. As a paramedic tended to my wound, I tried to explain what had happened, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, clearly doubting my story. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance," one explained, "but there's no sign of anyone else here." I shook my head vehemently, insisting they search the store. As they began to look around, a chill ran down my spine. The stockroom. I hadn't told them about the stockroom. "Wait," I called out, but it was too late. An officer had already opened the door. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. A dark figure burst from the room, knocking the officer aside. Gunshots rang out, mixing with shouts and screams. I caught a glimpse of the hooded man as he barreled towards the exit, the young woman right behind him. They moved with inhuman speed, dodging bullets and hands that tried to grab them. Just before they reached the door, the man turned, his empty face somehow grinning at me. "Until next time," he rasped. Then they were gone, vanishing into the night, leaving behind a scene of chaos and disbelief. The days and weeks that followed were a haze of police interviews, psychological evaluations, and sleepless nights. No one believed my story. Not really. They found no evidence of my attackers. No fingerprints. No DNA. The security footage showed nothing but static after the power outage. Even the wound in my side was dismissed as self-inflicted during some sort of psychotic episode. I was put on leave from work, prescribed medication I refused to take, and advised to seek therapy. My friends and family walked on eggshells around me, their concern mixed with doubt and fear. But I knew what I had experienced was real. Every night, I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows. I jump at shadows and flinch at unexpected sounds. I can't shake the feeling that they're out there, watching, waiting for another chance to finish their twisted game. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I swear I can hear a faint, raspy whisper. "Ready or not, here we come." The terror of that night at the convenience store may be over, but the fear never truly goes away. It was just another mundane Tuesday night at the 24-hour convenience store where I worked in suburban Boston. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the aisles of snacks and household essentials. I'd been pulling the graveyard shift for months now, trying to save up for college while my parents slept soundly in our cozy home just a few blocks away. The store was usually dead at this hour, save for the occasional drunk stumbling in for cigarettes or college students cramming for exams and needing a caffeine fix. I busied myself restocking shelves and scrolling through my phone, grateful for the quiet. Little did I know that this ordinary night was about to take a terrifying turn. As the clock ticked closer to 2 a.m., I heard the electronic chime of the front door. I looked up, expecting to see a familiar face, or perhaps a weary traveler stopping for gas. Instead, I locked eyes with a stranger whose gaze sent a chill down my spine. Something about this customer felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my once boring shift was about to become a night I'd never forget. The man who entered was tall and gaunt, his face partially obscured by the brim of a worn baseball cap. He moved with an eerie grace, his eyes never leaving mine as he approached the counter. "Evening," I managed to croak out, my throat suddenly dry. He didn't respond, just stood there, staring. The silence stretched on, becoming unbearable. I cleared my throat, about to ask if he needed help, when he finally spoke. "You're all alone here, aren't you?" His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried an undercurrent of menace that made my skin crawl. I instinctively glanced at the security camera in the corner, hoping its presence would deter any ill intentions. The man followed my gaze and smirked. "Those things don't always work, you know," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes glinting with something dangerous. My heart began to race as I realized how vulnerable I was. The store was isolated, tucked away on a quiet street with no other businesses open at this hour. I forced a smile, trying to maintain my composure. "Can I help you find anything?" I asked, hoping he'd just make a purchase and leave. Instead, he leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "Oh, I've already found exactly what I'm looking for," he whispered, just as I was about to hit the silent alarm button hidden beneath the counter. The lights flickered ominously. The man's smile widened as if he knew what was coming. Suddenly, we were plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerators died, and the electronic door chime fell silent. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for the flashlight we kept under the register. "Looks like we're having some technical difficulties," the man said, his voice dripping with mock concern. I finally found the flashlight and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. The man was gone. Panic seized me as I swept the light across the store, trying to locate him. The aisles cast long shadows, and every shape seemed to move in the corners of my vision. I could hear soft footsteps, but I couldn't tell where they were coming from. The store that had been so familiar to me now felt like a maze of potential hiding spots. I tried to calm myself, remembering the emergency protocols we'd been taught. But as I reached for my cell phone to call for help, I realized with horror that there was no signal. The power outage must have affected the cell towers too. I was truly alone, trapped in the dark, with a stranger who seemed to revel in my fear. As I stood frozen behind the counter, my flashlight beam trembling, I strained my ears for any sign of the man's whereabouts. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, I heard it, a soft scraping noise coming from the back of the store. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he trying to break into the storeroom? Or worse, was he disabling the back exit to trap me inside? I debated whether to investigate or stay put. The scraping stopped, replaced by a rhythmic tapping. It seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, as if the man was toying with me. I swallowed hard, trying to quell the rising panic in my chest. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the store, followed by the sound of glass shattering. I jumped, nearly dropping the flashlight. My hand shook as I swept the beam towards the source of the noise. Bottles of soda lay broken on the floor, their contents spreading in a dark puddle. But there was no sign of the man. The tapping resumed, louder now, more insistent. It was like a demented Morse code, spelling out my doom. I knew I had to move, to find a way out or a place to hide, but fear had rooted me to the spot. Gathering every ounce of courage I possessed, I decided to make a break for the front door. I moved cautiously, my flashlight illuminating the path ahead, but as I reached the entrance, my heart sank. The electronic lock, powered by the store's electrical system, was engaged. Without power, it wouldn't budge. I pushed and pulled frantically, but the door remained stubbornly shut. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I realized I was trapped inside with a potential predator. I spun around, my back pressed against the unyielding door, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The strange noises had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I tried to think rationally, to remember if there was a manual override for the lock, but my mind was clouded with fear, making it hard to focus. I knew I couldn't stay by the door. I was too exposed. I had to find a hiding spot, somewhere I could regroup and think of a plan. As I inched away from the entrance, a soft chuckle echoed through the store. "Having some trouble there?" the man's voice called out, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Don't worry, we have all night to get to know each other better." Just as despair was about to consume me, a shrill ringing cut through the silence. It took me a moment to realize it was coming from the store's landline behind the counter. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was someone calling to check on the power outage, or even the police responding to the silent alarm. I made a dash for the phone, my heart pounding in my ears. "Hello?" I whispered urgently into the receiver. There was a pause. Then a voice I didn't recognize spoke. "Are you alone?" the caller asked, their tone oddly calm. "No," I lied, my voice shaking. "The police are on their way." Another pause. "I wouldn't count on that," the voice replied. My blood ran cold as I realized this wasn't a rescue call. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. The caller chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Let's just say I'm a friend of the gentleman who's keeping you company tonight. He's been watching you for weeks, you know, learning your routine, your habits. Tonight's the night he's been waiting for." The line went dead, leaving me in stunned silence. The realization that this was a planned attack, that I had been targeted, made the situation even more terrifying. With the knowledge that I was the victim of a premeditated plot, my fear transformed into a desperate need to survive. I had to outsmart my stalker and his accomplice. I moved away from the counter, knowing it was too obvious a location. My eyes had adjusted somewhat to the darkness, allowing me to navigate without the flashlight, which I tucked into my pocket. I crouched low, using the aisles for cover as I tried to formulate a plan. Suddenly, I saw a shadow move at the end of an aisle. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The shadow paused, then began to move in my direction. I could hear soft footsteps now, slow and deliberate. My pursuer was in no hurry. He knew I had nowhere to go. I backed away slowly, trying to keep as many shelves between us as possible. As I moved, my foot knocked against something on the floor. I glanced down and saw a can of soup that had rolled off a shelf. An idea formed in my mind. I picked up the can, took a deep breath, and threw it as hard as I could in the opposite direction. The resulting clatter echoed through the store. I heard a quick intake of breath and rapid footsteps heading towards the noise. Taking advantage of the distraction, I darted towards the storeroom at the back of the shop. I slipped into the storeroom, easing the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, praying it would hold. I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath, leaning against a shelf stacked with boxes. As my eyes adjusted to the even deeper darkness of the room, something caught my attention. A tiny red light blinked steadily from the corner of the ceiling. I frowned, moving closer to investigate. With a jolt of shock, I realized it was a hidden camera. My mind raced. How long had it been there? What had it recorded? I scanned the room and spotted 2 more cameras strategically placed to cover every angle. The sickening realization hit me. This wasn't just a random attack. The stalker had been watching me for who knows how long, learning my every move. I felt violated, exposed, and more terrified than ever. But the discovery also sparked a flame of anger within me. I wasn't going to be a passive victim in this twisted game. I grabbed a heavy box from a nearby shelf and smashed it into the nearest camera, then quickly dealt with the others. As glass and plastic rained down, I heard an enraged roar from outside the storeroom. My actions had clearly upset my tormentor's plans. The stalker's angry shouts were getting closer. I knew I had only moments before he would break through the door. My eyes darted around the storeroom, searching for anything I could use as a weapon or a means of escape. That's when I spotted it. A small window near the ceiling, usually used for ventilation. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was my only chance. I quickly stacked boxes to create a makeshift ladder, my hands trembling with adrenaline. Just as I reached the window, I heard the storeroom door splinter. "You can't escape me!" the man snarled, his voice filled with a terrifying mix of rage and excitement. I fumbled with the window latch, finally managing to push it open. Cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the promise of freedom. I hoisted myself up, painfully aware of how exposed I was. As I wiggled through the narrow opening, I felt a hand grab my ankle. I kicked wildly, my foot connecting with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and the grip loosened. With a final burst of effort, I pulled myself through the window, tumbling onto the pavement outside. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run, only to find myself face to face with another stranger. I stumbled backward, ready to scream, when the stranger held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Whoa, easy there," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Am here to help." I hesitated, torn between the threat behind me and this unknown person in front of me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice hoarse with fear. "I'm Detective Mike Ramirez," he replied, slowly reaching into his pocket and producing a badge. "We've been tracking this guy for months." I was staking out the store when the power went out. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by suspicion. How could I trust him? As if reading my thoughts, he added, "I know you're scared, but right now, I'm your best chance at getting out of this alive." A crash from inside the store made me jump. The stalker was coming. Detective Ramirez grabbed my arm. "We need to move now," he insisted. I made a split-second decision and nodded, allowing him to guide me towards a car parked in the shadows. As we ran, I heard the stalker's enraged shouts behind us. "You can't hide from me," he screamed. "I'll find you." We reached the car, and Ramirez shoved me into the passenger seat before jumping in himself. As Detective Ramirez sped away from the store, I finally allowed myself to breathe. But my relief was short-lived. In the rearview mirror, I saw headlights approaching fast. "He's following us," I gasped. Ramirez cursed under his breath, accelerating through the empty suburban streets. "Listen carefully," he said, his eyes flicking between the road and the mirror. "The man after you is Thomas Reeves. He's wanted for multiple stalking cases and 2 murders in the tri-state area." My blood ran cold at this information. "Why me?" I whispered. Ramirez's expression darkened. "He targets young women working alone in isolated areas. You fit his victim profile." A sob escaped me as the reality of my situation sank in. Ramirez reached over and squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "We're going to get you somewhere safe," he promised. Suddenly, our pursuer's car rammed into us from behind. I screamed as we fishtailed, Ramirez fighting to keep control. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Reeves through the rear window. His face was contorted with manic determination, his eyes locked on me. It was a look I knew would haunt my nightmares for years to come if I survived this night. The chase continued through the deserted streets of suburban Boston, our car careening around corners with Reeves hot on our tail. Detective Ramirez's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he navigated the twisting roads. "I'm going to try to lose him in the industrial district," he shouted over the roar of the engine. I nodded mutely, too terrified to speak. We sped past darkened warehouses and abandoned lots, the scenery a blur. Reeves was relentless, matching our every turn. Suddenly, Ramirez made a sharp right, cutting through an empty parking lot. For a moment, I thought we'd lost our pursuer, but then headlights appeared in my side mirror, growing larger by the second. "He's going to ram us again," I cried out. Ramirez swerved at the last second, causing Reeves to overshoot. His car skidded, tires screeching against the pavement. For a heartbeat, I thought he would crash. But Reeves regained control, his face visible through the window. The look of pure hatred he gave me made my blood run cold. "Why won't he give up?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ramirez's jaw tightened. Men like him, they see their victims as possessions. In his mind, you belong to him. The word sent a shudder through me. I realized then that this chase would only end one way, with Reeves' capture or our demise. Our car screeched to a halt in an abandoned warehouse lot, steam billowing from the hood. The engines overheated. Ramirez growled, slamming his palm against the steering wheel. We need to make a run for it. We scrambled out of the car just as Reeves' vehicle came into view. There! Ramirez pointed to a dilapidated warehouse. We can lose him inside. We sprinted across the lot, the sound of Reeves' car door slamming echoing behind us. Inside the warehouse, darkness enveloped us. Ramirez pulled out his flashlight, illuminating a maze of old machinery and forgotten inventory. "Stay close," he whispered. We moved deeper into the building, our footsteps echoing ominously. Suddenly, a noise made us freeze. "Well, well," Reeves' voice rang out, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Looks like our little game of cat and mouse is coming to an end." Ramirez pushed me behind a large crate, his gun drawn. "Stay here," he hissed. "I'm going to try to flank him." Before I could protest, he disappeared into the shadows. I crouched behind the crate, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure Reeves could hear it. The warehouse fell silent, save for the occasional creak of metal or distant drip of water. Then, a scuffle broke out somewhere to my left. I heard grunts of exertion and the sound of fists connecting with flesh. A gunshot rang out, the flash briefly illuminating the space. I stifled a scream, unsure who had fired or been hit. More sounds of struggle ensued, moving closer to my hiding spot. Suddenly, a body crashed into the crate I was behind, sending me sprawling. I looked up to see Reeves looming over me, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer. "Found you," he growled, reaching for me. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I grabbed a nearby piece of rusted pipe and swung it with all my might, connecting with Reeves' knee. He howled in pain, stumbling backward. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run, when Detective Ramirez appeared, tackling Reeves to the ground. The sound of sirens pierced the night air, growing louder by the second. Relief washed over me as I realized backup was finally arriving. Ramirez, bruised and bloodied but still standing, had Reeves pinned to the ground. "It's over," he panted, securing handcuffs around the stalker's wrists. Reeves thrashed and snarled like a wild animal, his eyes never leaving me. "This isn't over," he spat. "I'll find you again. I always do." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to stand tall. "No, you won't," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "You're going away for a long time." The warehouse doors burst open, flooding the space with flashing red and blue lights. A team of officers swarmed in, weapons drawn. They quickly took control of the situation, relieving Ramirez of his captive. As Reeves was led away, still hurling threats and obscenities, a female officer approached me. "Are you all right?" she asked gently, draping a shock blanket over my shoulders. I nodded numbly, the events of the night finally catching up to me. "You're safe now," she assured me, guiding me towards an ambulance waiting outside. As we stepped into the cool night air, I saw Reeves being shoved into a police car. Our eyes met one last time, and I shuddered at the malice I saw there. In the days and weeks that followed, I struggled to return to normalcy. The convenience store remained closed for investigation, and I found myself jumping at every shadow, every unexpected noise. Sleep became elusive, plagued by nightmares of Reeves breaking into my home or chasing me through endless dark corridors. My parents insisted I see a therapist, and slowly I began to process the trauma of that night. Detective Ramirez kept me updated on the case. Reeves was charged with multiple counts of stalking, attempted kidnapping, and assault. The evidence from the hidden cameras in the store only added to his charges. Despite the reassurances that he would be locked away for life, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I installed new locks and a security system at home, but still found myself checking and rechecking them obsessively. Even as life went on, as I eventually returned to work and started college, the events of that night left an indelible mark on my psyche. I knew the fear might never fully disappear, but I was determined not to let it control me. Each day, I chose to step out. My front door was an act of defiance against Reeves and the terror he had tried to instill in me. I was a survivor, and no matter how long it took, I would reclaim my life and my sense of safety. It was just another Tuesday night at Joe's 247 convenience store in suburban Detroit. As a college student working part-time, I was used to these graveyard shifts. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the empty aisles. Outside, the parking lot was deserted, save for my beat-up Honda Civic. I yawned, glancing at the clock, 11:30 p.m. The night was young, and I had hours to go before my shift ended at 6 a.m. I busied myself restocking shelves, the monotonous task punctuated only by the occasional ding of the door chime as late-night customers wandered in for snacks or cigarettes. The radio played softly in the background, some local station discussing the unseasonably cold weather we'd been having. I shivered, pulling my hoodie tighter around me. The store's heating system was on the fritz again, and the chill seemed to seep into my bones. Little did I know, the cold was the least of my worries. As I arranged packets of beef jerky on the rack, I had no idea that this ordinary night was about to take a terrifying turn. As the clock ticked past midnight, an eerie stillness settled over the store. The usual hum of the refrigerators seemed louder, more intrusive. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to stretch a little longer in the corners, or how the normally comforting glow of the Open 24 HRS sign now felt like a beacon for something sinister. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to too many horror movies and lack of sleep. But then I noticed other things. The security camera in the corner, usually blinking steadily, now flickered erratically. The magazine covers on the rack seemed to stare back at me, their glossy eyes following my movements. Even the products on the shelves felt different, as if they were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I shook my head, trying to clear these ridiculous thoughts. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, but the words sounded hollow in the oppressive silence. That's when I realized the radio had gone dead, leaving only static in its wake. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I reached for my phone, desperate for some connection to the outside world. The door chime rang, startling me out of my anxious reverie. A tall figure shuffled in, hunched against the cold. Relief washed over me. Finally, another person to break the unsettling quiet. But as the customer approached the counter, my relief quickly turned to unease. He was dressed oddly for the weather, wearing a thin jacket despite the biting cold outside. His face was partially obscured by a baseball cap pulled low, but what I could see was pale and gaunt. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet store. The man didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, swaying slightly, his breathing ragged and uneven. When he finally looked up, I had to stifle a gasp. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around wildly, never quite focusing on me. I need," he mumbled, his words slurred and barely audible. His hands, I noticed, were shaking uncontrollably. Was he on something? Sick? I tensed, ready to reach for the panic button under the counter if needed. "Sir?" I prompted, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you need?" Just as the strange customer opened his mouth to respond, the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged us into total darkness. The sudden blackout was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment I thought I'd gone blind. The hum of the refrigerators died, leaving an oppressive silence broken only by my own rapid breathing and the stranger's raspy inhales. "Stay calm," I said, more to myself than to the customer. The backup generator should kick in any second, but seconds ticked by, and we remained in darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled behind the counter for the flashlight we kept for emergencies. My fingers closed around it, just as I heard a shuffling sound from where the customer had been standing. "Sir?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" No response. I flicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. I swept it across the store, expecting to see the strange man still at the counter, but he was gone, vanished. The front door hadn't chimed, so where could he have gone so quickly? And why? In the eerie silence of the darkened store, the shrill ring of the landline phone cut through the air like a knife, making me jump. Who could be calling at this hour, especially during a blackout? With shaking hands, I picked up the receiver. "Hello? Joe's convenience store," I stammered. At first, there was only static on the line, a soft hiss that sent chills down my spine. Then, a voice, low, gravelly, and somehow familiar. "Are you alone?" the caller asked, their tone unnervingly calm. My breath caught in my throat. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The voice chuckled, a sound devoid of any warmth or humor. "Look outside," it instructed. Then the line went dead. Against my better judgment, I turned towards the store's front windows, my flashlight beam trembling as it illuminated the glass. There, in the parking lot, stood a figure, motionless, watching. And I realized with growing horror that it was the strange customer from earlier. But how had he gotten outside without me noticing? And more importantly, why was he just standing there, staring at me through the darkness? My heart pounding, I quickly moved away from the windows, ducking behind a shelf. The flashlight beam danced wildly as my hands shook uncontrollably. Shadows seemed to writhe and twist in its unsteady light, transforming familiar store aisles into a nightmarish landscape. Every corner, every gap between shelves suddenly seemed to hide potential threats. I tried to calm myself, taking deep breaths, but the air felt thick, and oppressive. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Among the shifting shadows cast by my flashlight, one seemed different, darker, more solid, and it was moving independently of the light's motion. I blinked hard, convinced my fear-addled mind was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the shadow was closer. It seemed to pulse and undulate, as if alive. A whimper escaped my lips as I backed away, bumping into displays and sending items clattering to the floor. The noise seemed deafening in the silent store, and I winced, certain it would attract whatever was lurking in the darkness. As I retreated, the shadow advanced, growing larger, more defined, and I could have sworn I heard it whisper my name. Panic overtaking me, I sprinted for the front door, desperate to escape the oppressive darkness and whatever was hiding within it. My trembling hands grasped the door handle, pulling with all my might, but it didn't budge. I tried again, rattling the door violently, but it remained stubbornly shut. No, 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 I muttered, my voice rising hysterically. How could it be locked? I hadn't locked it. The electronic security system shouldn't even work during a power outage. I spun around, scanning the store with my flashlight. The back door. Maybe that was still open. I raced through the aisles, knocking over displays in my haste. But when I reached it, I found it just as immovable as the front. Trapped. I was trapped in here with whatever that thing was. My breath came in short, sharp gasps as claustrophobia set in. The wall seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against me from all sides. I slumped against the door, sliding down to the floor. The flashlight slipped from my grasp, rolling away and casting long, distorted shadows across the store. And in those shadows, I saw movement once again. As I sat there, paralyzed by fear, the silence of the store was suddenly broken by a cacophony of unexplained noises. It started with a soft scratching sound, like nails dragging across a chalkboard, coming from somewhere deep within the store. Then came a series of dull thuds, as if something heavy was being dropped repeatedly. My eyes darted around wildly, trying to pinpoint the sources of these sounds, but the darkness seemed to swallow everything beyond the narrow beam of my fallen flashlight. A high-pitched whine filled the air, rising in intensity until it was almost unbearable. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did little to muffle the sound. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, the noises stopped abruptly, plunging the store back into silence. But this silence was somehow worse, tense, expectant, as if the very air was holding its breath. Then, from right beside me, came a sound that made my heart nearly stop. A low, guttural growl, unmistakably inhuman. I scrambled to my feet, snatching up the flashlight and spinning around. But there was nothing there. Nothing I could see, at least. Adrenaline coursing through my veins. I knew I couldn't just sit there, waiting for whatever was in the store to find me. I had to find a way out. My mind raced, considering options. The windows. They were reinforced, but maybe I could break through them. I grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from its mount on the wall and approached the front windows cautiously, my flashlight beam sweeping back and forth for any sign of movement. Taking a deep breath, I swung the extinguisher with all my might. The resulting clang was deafening, but the window held firm. I swung again and again, each impact sending shockwaves up my arms. Finally, hairline cracks began to appear. Hope surged through me, giving me renewed strength. One more big swing, I thought. That's all I need. But as I raised the extinguisher for a final blow, a hand grabbed my wrist from behind. I screamed, spinning around, my flashlight illuminating a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly altered. It was the strange customer from earlier, but his features were now twisted into an inhuman snarl, his eyes glowing an unnatural red in the darkness. Did you really think you could escape? The creature that had once been the strange customer hissed, its voice a grotesque parody of human speech. In the harsh beam of my flashlight, I could see that its skin had taken on a grayish hue, stretched tight over protruding bones. Its teeth, bared in a feral grin, were sharp and numerous. "What are you?" I stammered, trying to wrench my arm free from its iron grip. The creature's grin widened impossibly. "I am your worst nightmare come to life," it said, almost gleefully. "I've been watching you for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. And now, finally, we're alone." My mind reeled. Weeks? Had this thing been stalking me all this time? I thought back to all the times I'd felt uneasy walking to my car after late shifts, the prickling sensation of being watched. It hadn't been paranoia after all. "Why me?" I managed to choke out. The creature tilted its head, regarding me with an almost curious expression. "Why not?" it replied simply. Then, with inhuman speed, it lunged forward. I managed to duck just in time, the creature's claws grazing my scalp as I dove between its legs. I scrambled to my feet and ran, weaving between the store aisles in a desperate attempt to put some distance between us. But I could hear it right behind me, its breath hot on my neck, claws scraping against the linoleum floor. I knocked over displays as I ran, hoping to slow it down, but it seemed to navigate the obstacles with ease. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but pure terror kept me moving. I darted into the stockroom, quickly scanning for a place to hide. Boxes were stacked high on metal shelves, creating a maze-like environment. I ducked behind a large crate, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. For a moment, all was silent. Then I heard it enter the room, its footsteps slow and deliberate. Come out, wherever you are," it called in a sing-song voice that made my skin crawl. "You're only prolonging the inevitable." I closed my eyes, praying it wouldn't find me, but as its footsteps grew closer, I knew this deadly game of cat and mouse was far from over. As I crouched behind the crate, trying to make myself as small as possible, I realized with growing horror that I wasn't just hiding from one threat. The entire store had become a deadly maze. The shadows I'd seen earlier were moving again, coalescing into vaguely humanoid shapes that prowled the aisles. Were they real, or just figments of my terrified imagination? I didn't want to find out. The creature that had been stalking me was still searching the stockroom, its claws scraping against metal shelves as it hunted. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. Sooner or later, it would find me. I needed a plan. My eyes darted around, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. That's when I spotted it, a box cutter lying on a nearby shelf. If I could just reach it without making a sound. Slowly, carefully, I stretched out my arm. My fingers had just brushed the handle when a low chuckle froze me in place. "Found you," the creature whispered, its foul breath hot against my ear. In that moment, pure instinct took over. I grabbed the box cutter and swung around wildly, feeling the blade connect with something solid. The creature howled in pain and fury, stumbling backward. I didn't waste a second. I bolted past it, back into the main store area, but had only taken a few steps when I skidded to a halt. The shadowy figures Id glimpsed earlier were no longer just shapes. They had form now, grotesque parodies of human beings with elongated limbs and featureless faces. They surrounded me, closing in from all sides. Behind me, I could hear the enraged roars of the creature as it recovered from my attack. I was trapped between two nightmarish threats, with nowhere left to run. My grip tightened on the box cutter, a pitiful weapon against such horrors, but it was all I had. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The shadows paused, as if surprised by my defiance. Then, as one, they lunged forward. At the same moment, the creature from the stockroom burst through the door behind me. Time seemed to slow down as I faced my final confrontation. In that moment of terror, something inside me snapped. With a primal scream, I lashed out with the box cutter, slashing wildly at the encroaching shadows. To my shock, they recoiled, dissipating like smoke where the blade touched them. Hope surged through me, giving me renewed strength. I spun around to face the creature that had been stalking me just as it leaped towards me with claws outstretched. In a move born of desperation, I ducked and rolled, causing it to collide with the shadowy figures behind me. As they grappled with each other, I made a mad dash for the front of the store. The windows were still cracked from my earlier attempt to break them. With the last reserves of my strength, I hurled myself at the weakened glass. There was a moment of resistance, then a deafening crash as I burst through into the cold night air. I hit the pavement hard, feeling glass shards cut into my skin, but the pain was nothing compared to the relief of escape. Scrambling to my feet, I ran towards the street, not daring to look back. As I reached the road, I heard an inhuman shriek of rage from the store. Then, miraculously, I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms frantically, and the car screeched to a halt beside me. An elderly couple peered out at me in concern. "Are you all right, son?" As I stumbled into the elderly couple's car, babbling about monsters and shadows, I could see the concern and skepticism in their eyes. They drove me to the nearest hospital, where I was treated for cuts and minor injuries from my dramatic escape through the window. The police were called, but when they investigated Joe's convenience store, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The power was back on, everything was in its place, and there was no sign of the terrifying creatures I had encountered. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a vivid hallucination brought on by stress and sleep deprivation. But deep down, I knew the truth. The nightmares that plagued me every night were too real, too vivid to be mere products of my imagination. I quit my job at the convenience store and transferred to a different college, desperate to put as much distance as possible between myself and that terrifying night. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow moving independently of its source, or see a face in the crowd that looked eerily similar to the creature that had stalked me. Oh, years have passed, and I've built a new life for myself. But the fear never truly goes away. Every time I pass a convenience store at night, my heart races. Every unexplained noise in the dark sends me into a panic. And always, there's that nagging feeling that someday, somehow, those creatures will find me again.